think it's
the Fake Safety Podcast with Vance and Bart.
It's a trap. There's no comfort fitting in a fake safety that no one believes in.
so.
Yep.
We're live here in the most rebellious age we've ever been in. We have uprisings left and right. We have an insurrection that happened in January in the United States of these Americas. And then we currently have an insurrection happening in Cuba.
Correct. Across the land bridge.
Against the dictatorship, yes?
See.
Okay.
The communist dictatorship. They still own the means of production for almost everything there. They have lightened it up a little bit. Like, you can own a restaurant in Cuba now. The state doesn't own them all. They own a lot of them, but they have to get their food from the state central thing. So like everything still tastes the same. It's just you tend to get better service at the privately owned restaurants. So I guess it's not totally communist there.
Well,
they've lightened it up a little bit, I'm saying, from what it used to be.
How do they actually identify? Because we know them as I believe, socialist dictatorship. But I'm curious about if they recognize, like, what do they recognize their leader as?
Yeah. I mean, he was unapologetically, well, I guess I don't know their leader now, but, originally it was unapologetically, I'm a Marxist, but.
Right. But when you, and I think there's Miguel and Manuel, like there's a handful. I think it's that they spread it across a handful of folks, power wise, but they're all sort of heading in the same direction, right? Like there's the president and there's the prime minister, and then there's some other thing that I believe is a president. I want to say his name's Esteban something, but I guess that's just sort of my big question is, do they identify as a dictatorship knowing that they have a group of folks in charge who act as dictators? Or is that how we classify them? I legitimately don't know the answer to that question.
I don't either. But
like, I know they identify as socialist, and some are, and they'll say, oh, we're a Marxist, Leninist, whatever. In the same way that, like, in the US, right? Like, we have some schools of thought who say, well, we are a democracy. And then some folks will say, well, not a pure democracy because we're a republic, right? But at no point would we say that we're in a dictatorship unless we hate the leader. Mm-hmm. Right. So the people who use the word insurrection to describe the January 6th event, they would call Trump a dictator, but they still wouldn't identify as living in a country under a dictatorship. Right.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
I guess that's the kind of nuance of what I'm getting at here is.
I got you. Well, then I would say that they probably call themselves what they were originally, a Marxist, communist dictatorship. Because, we still think we're a republic and democratically elected republic. We still would say that about us. But me and a lot of people in this country don't believe that Joe Biden suddenly got more votes than any other person ever being voted for in the history of voting for somebody. You know, um, so at that point, who's electing the president? Uh, eh, Obviously, you're not. If that's true, which I believe it is, then it's not democratic, nor is it a republic. So,
Well, the people who call it a republic are not the ones who would have voted him in, right? Like the people who would
right.
call it a republic are the ones who are, I would say, likely carrying a pocket constitution around with them.
Yeah. Yeah, probably, but still, I mean, even if he would have, if Trump would have won, we weren't, the federal government had long since taken over as the more powerful government, as opposed to each state being more powerful than the central. The central was only really in agreement between the states. That was what the republic was supposed to be. It was just an agreement to, you know, live by these rules, and if anybody broke them, then we could just bail. But I mean, places tried to bail before, not just with the Civil War, but other times in history, states tried to bail and they were forced to not. So the republic thing kind of went out the window a long time ago.
Well, I mean, Cuba was a republic, right? I mean, until uh, the revolution, right? So, up until the 50s, Cuba would have been recognized.
I guess they would have called themselves one, whether they actually acted like a republic or not. Those are two different things, right? Because we call ourselves a democratic republic here, but we're not. So I would think just whatever tradition says that you are is probably what you call your country.
Right. You can't be you can't be a republic if you're basically just a country that was orphaned by Spain and adopted by the United States. I declare independence. That's an office joke for those of you who are following along at home. You can't just, or you can, but either way, the core of I think what we're talking about here is that rebellion. What is the insurrection? What is the revolution? What are you rebelling against? And they're rebelling against, I would guess, the power of the state, the dictatorship. The group here that we called the insurrection were rebelling against the swamp, I guess, is what they would call it.
Yeah.
And then the people who are rebelling against the system, I'm not sure which system they're rebelling against.
Yeah, so we've had some rebellious groups or events in my history. We had Occupy Wall Street. That was pretty rebellious. Tea Party, the early days of it were pretty rebellious.
And not to go too far out of chronological order, but we have Wall Street Bets now, which is almost a modern day equivalent of Occupy Wall Street, which feels strange because I feel like Occupy Wall Street is modern, but it was some decade ago. Because I do remember those Occupy Wall Street protesters blocking my bus so I couldn't get to work. So all the bankers still made money, but I did not. I was like, I've got tables to wait.
Yeah, it was it's a different time.
But yeah, so we have a modern rebel in the form of the GameStop traders and the people fighting against the short sellers and the hedge funds, right?
Yeah. And then we got other people that call themselves rebels fighting against. I mean, if you went to that Gretchen girl who spoke in front of the UN about climate change, I imagine she felt like she was a rebel, but she was speaking
Greta, you mean?
yeah, Greta. Did I say something else?
I think you said Gretchen, but I'm not even
Probably.
100% that it's not one of those two.
But all the climate change people think they're rebels. They're fighting against something that I don't know where it exists, but
Well, yeah, what is the straw man? What are they rebelling against, would you say?
well, at this point, it seems like it's just the right, really. Like anything the right says, they just use it. Climate change is involved in something. It's that's what it seems like to me. Because there's no desire to fix like if you take what they say is happening as the gospel, there's no desire to fix that. So it's not about the climate change. It just seems like it's just about the right in general.
Don't you think there is a desire to fix that, though? Right? We're talking about passing legislation for green energy and renewable materials.
By their own metrics, they say that this won't change anything.
But it starts with one, as Lincoln Park would say. You can do your small part, and then
We have 12 years and we're all dead. I mean,
that is what I read in the 80s.
well, I mean, that's what they were saying not that long ago, too. So, like, we're all going to freeze to death in the 80s because we used Aquanet. And then now we're all going to burn up because, they put the heat sensors underneath lamps and shit. We're next to air conditioning units. Whatever.
I liken it to the news cycle around foods that cause cancer.
Yeah.
Right? Where, all of a sudden this week, tomatoes cause cancer. I think it's more like cancer happens and cancer will happen if you live long enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I won't go too deep into the whole like length of telomeres thing because that's another podcast we should be on. But thus, you could get cancer by doing any activity. And in the same way, I think the climate science probably has some similar problems around there being no real control in terms of, and when I say control, I mean a control within an experiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're guessing for the most part. And I will say that it's not that I'm against climate science. It is that I am against believing you have any idea how to read the data from climate science because correlation does not equal causation.
Right. And of course, all the climate science is funded by think tanks designed to get more funding for this corporation or that corporation.
But is that the corporation they're rebelling against? Because if they're falling in line with the same party line as the corporation, I still don't know what system you're rebelling against.
Yeah, I don't see that there is one. I think it's more of a feeling. It's it's the trick. It's the propaganda trick of appealing to that side of you, getting an emotional response out of you over it, and then letting you can throw a lot of false information, maybe sprinkle some good stuff in there, but saying this and then get false information saying that counteracts what you believe over here to make you mad, to reinforce that emotional response. So therefore, you're so emotionally invested in it, you don't even realize that you are now working for the people who you originally believed were evil. So it's a sales tactic, propaganda tactic, whatever, and it works. Look at it. Look at us. I mean, I bet if I went to a family event tomorrow and started talking about Trash Island, there would be 100 people there talking about it, whether they believed it was an issue or not. I bet most of them would believe it exists.
Is Trash Island a reality show that I haven't heard about?
I don't know, but if it did exist, why wouldn't us libertarians go live there? I mean, and make it our Ancapistan. I mean, it's already a floating island. Let's put some plywood on top of that thing and build us a seastead. But unfortunately, it doesn't exist, so we can't do that. It's not there.
Actually, see, okay, I think I'm following where you're going. So the Trash Island is usually just photos a day or so after a tsunami and trash pulled in from a society, which means we should spray Aquanet into the air to make more tsunamis so that they're ongoing. That creates a trash island for us to have a seastead. Did I connect the dots correctly?
Aquanet, cool off. Yeah. I think so.
Aquanet, tsunami, seastead.
Hurricane. No hurricanes. So yes, that would work. You wouldn't want a hurricane.
More Aquanet.
Right. Because hurricanes are caused by the cold at our poles and the hot at the difference. The bigger the difference is in temperature at our equator to our poles, the more likely a hurricane is to come about. Therefore, the global warming creating hurricanes thing does not work. But because we have what we are in an ice age currently in the Earth cycle, we are currently in an ice age. We have these poles that have ice caps and are cold. So what we need to do is cool off our equator. So you're right. We just make sure that when we spray the Aquanet, we only do it near the equator.
But if we're in an ice age now,
we are. Okay.
Wouldn't that mean we need to warm up the equator to balance against that cold front coming from the poles?
Well, no, because if we warm up the equator, then the difference is going to be great. Therefore, we'll have more hurricanes.
And tsunamis.
I think tsunamis aren't caused by hurricanes.
Well, a hurricane is just a tornado with water, right? Can you still get a trash island from a hurricane? I feel like you can.
I think earthquakes cause tsunamis typically.
But not Trash Island directly. It causes a tsunami, which causes Trash Island.
Right.
So tectonic plate shift is what we're banking on here.
Right. And we all know we get those by gay people sleeping together in California.
You hear that, gays?
You could save the world.
Do what you got to do.
Just do it, man.
I should go down to the Castro and start handing out flyers, just really confusing flyers about how to save the world.
I think that the reason why people are so quick to believe something on whatever other side you decide to fall onto, it's because they're fed so much bullshit like that. Like, that's how our news cycle works. What we just said is how our news cycle works. It'll say some ridiculous shit, sprinkle in a little bit of truth. And then on this side, it'll say some ridiculous shit, sprinkle in just a tiny bit of truth, something to hold on to. And then the same side will say something completely contradictory to that the next day. But your mind has to start, because you've picked sides, you're emotionally invested. You have to start figuring out ways to be okay with these contradictions in your head. And then you get so used to that you just start, instead of fighting that in your brain anymore, you've picked this side, you just stop fighting it. And you say, whatever they say today is my team. Because it is so, it's mind numbing. It can bring me down on some of the best days if I hear the wrong thing. And I could see how it would just be easier for most people to be like, all right, I've picked this team. Okay. This is whatever they said. And then, they get you focused. If you're listening to CNN, you get focused on something ridiculous that somebody on Fox said. So you're not even looking at the ridiculous shit that your team said. You're just saying, oh, could you believe these idiots believe this? And then they're doing the same thing on Fox. Meanwhile, you're both believing in this ridiculous shit. The state's getting more powerful. Corporations that don't have your best interest at heart are getting more powerful, and then they find, then some rich billionaire who does tons of evil shit does one thing good for the world, and the leftists that are still anti-corporate jump onto that instead of all the evil shit that corporations have been doing, and be like, oh, this is the reason why billionaires are going into space. This is why they should be taxed more. It's because a billionaire actually advanced society a little bit with his own money. That's the reason why. Like the war machine and all that, that's not the reason, like, but we went into space for civilian reasons and made it cheaper. That's why billionaires should be taxed.
Is it because we're worried about them damaging the ozone layer in the same way as Aquanet? If they
there's already a hole. How do you think they're getting out?
That's true. That's true.
I mean, and we all know that the airlock code is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It's like the code from an idiot's luggage.
Right. It's a Mega Maid, sir. She's gone from suck to blow.
So maybe we're the idiots then, right? Because that narrative, that propaganda is clearly working. So maybe the state is smarter than we are. Maybe it knows what's best for us because it's way better at marketing its material than we are.
Yeah, I guess it is. I mean, it's got all of our money. So like
I don't have any of the state's money. It
No.
has quite a bit of mine.
Right. So I mean, we are coming from a deficit there. If you had an unlimited propaganda budget, you could probably do a little better.
But isn't that the narrative around all of these pirates, right? Is that the cryptocurrency is just printing your own money the same way the Fed does?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I mean, who cares? I mean, if I've got to have printed money, I'd rather have it from somebody I trust than somebody I don't. I mean, I don't trust the feds at all. So I don't want theirs. You know? I don't know. I just, if crypto is just as bad as the state money, then crypto's got a lot of catching up to do because they're not killing people in Yemen with it. They're not creating genocides. There's not wars going on as long as like 30 years. I mean, being funded with it. So hurry up, Bitcoin. Let's get to killing some people.
Well, isn't the story though that Bitcoin is already happening in the underworld? So maybe it is already transacting for that sort of thing.
I guess. I mean, I think that's more the narrative that they like to say because it's not doing that. It's actually people are using it to hide their money from the state money that does go to killing people. And they're not getting as much of it. And they're not able to control it as much. So I think that's more the problem. Whether there are some bad actors using it for funding bad things and not, it didn't really matter to me because it's not the gun that kills the person, it's the person that kills the person. I just know that if the bad guy also controls this money, like every aspect of this money, that's not the money that I want to have. Yeah, I want them to have to work to manipulate it, you know? So
What centralized currency in the world today are we rebelling against? Is it the US dollar?
I would say it would be the euro and the US dollar because they're connected. It's like our central bank and their central bank are sisters. So they work together. It was an Anglo idea. We were like the little sister of their central bank. And we've worked in tandem that way ever since. So it would be those two. I mean,
But I think it's more a conglomerate, right? In the same way as the dictatorship in Cuba. Yeah, you can spread it around among, first secretary, prime minister, et cetera, but the US dollar, the euro, the pound, a handful of yen,
yeah, I mean,
they're all this centralized currency that's run by these states that all have the handshake, right? So
Yeah.
When we're rebelling against a currency, it's more we're rebelling against a type of currency, which is not any one single currency.
Yeah. It's a state sponsored fiat currency of any kind. I wouldn't want my money in any of those. But unfortunately, we're forced to deal in them more than I'd want to. But we're making moves. I like the Bitcoin thing. I like the crypto thing, but I'm not anybody who sits here and says that that's going to be the answer. But I like that it's a thorn, whether it's a bigger that's got poison on the thorn or not. I mean, I hope it does. I hope that it's a fiat currency, a state funded sponsored fiat currency killer. But if it's just a thorn that annoys, that I'm still for that. I still like that too. Um, so, uh, crypto's one thing that I like, but I like it because it bothers them, and that's a simple fact. I like it because they haven't figured it out yet, and it bothers them. So,
I think that's a valid question then. The idea of rebellion for the sake of rebellion, right? How do we make sure that we don't rebel in the same way as these misguided individuals who think they're rebelling against the system when in fact they're just towing the party line of
well,
the corporatocracy?
I think you have to. Well, it's a hard thing to answer for people who live the way that they live, because it's very easy for me and you, because we can look at any situation like that or what the news says, and we can say, all right, apply my principles to that. Oh, well, shit. When you start going through the thought process of it, you apply your principles, you're like, oh shit, I can't do that. And it just keeps you away from things like that. And then now then you start arguing about the way you want to live. Oh, yeah, I don't want to live like those people live. I think that I do better for the things that I feel are important to live this way. And you don't get caught up in all that shit that makes you look like an idiot when you step back and look at what you're really advocating for. So being grounded in, I think that having an economics, like some sort of foundation in economics, is important, to not be manipulated, and also just remembering your principles. So I do recommend reading something, whether it's, I don't say everybody should read Human Action, or, I mean, that's a lot, but economics in one lesson, that's very short and very to the point. And if you can absorb that book, which it's not that hard to absorb, by the time you're done with that, 90% of people don't know as much about economics as you do when you're done with that one fucking book. So I think that that's important. And then you've got our principles. And then at that point, all that stuff it can hit you. You can still get an emotional response from something that's said by the propaganda machine. But you and I can get that response, get mad, and then step back and say, if we look at it with it through an economics lens, a lot of times we can just figure out, oh, that's not even that. That's a false statement, or whatever, and then say that doesn't do that, it still seems plausible or whatever, then we look at it through our principles and we say, either this is something that you could do and not violate your principle, or something that you really couldn't mess with this without violating your principles. And those two things, those two lenses, you can look through it through. There's really nothing that your CIA owned news networks tell me is the right thing to do that really passes either of those tests nowadays. So,
and I think that's what I'm looking for, right? Is that we are getting so caught up in rebelling. And I just want to, I think, make note of the fact that even a broken clock is right twice a day. So the idea that rebellion for the sake of rebellion may also be dangerous, in that if we just assume that anything Fox News tells us to do or CNN tells us to do is wrong, it may also be dangerous for us because we're not actually checking that through those lenses you're talking about. Because it's really difficult to parse our day to day through those sorts of things. And that's why I would recommend just staying away from that media as best you can. But it has to be exhausting to try and rebel against all of that while still putting that through your own ability to measure if that goes against your principles or not.
It does. It gets easier, I must say. The more I read, the more I research, the more I learn about the techniques used in propaganda, things like that. It's like a filter before I have to get there. So a lot of things I can just weed out because, I know that that's typical propaganda method. So I'm not even going to entertain that. And then things that do strike my intellectual juices or whatever, get them flowing. Then I start going through those two main filters, and it's less exhausting now, but you're right. It's everyday life can get exhausting, especially at first going through that, through those filters, but you'll get better at it, and it won't take you as long to do your little step-by-step thought experiment with whatever you're being presented. Because even if you don't learn all the propaganda things, you're not fascinated with learning that. When you do these thought experiments with whatever's been presented to you through your economic and principled lenses, there'll be similarities that you'll mentally chalk, make a little note in the back of your head. And then the next time you're presented something, it might be something that you're like, oh, well, this is going to have the same result as that other thing. And it doesn't take you as long. So it gets easier, guys.
Conversely, though, I think there is a real fear of taking too many shortcuts around doing a template for certain things around certain sources, right? If Kaiser Permanente tells me that I should be consuming more broccoli in some ad campaign, it's unsafe for me to have saved a template of Big Pharma's always wrong. I should rebel against what they're saying and say, Big Pharma's not going to tell me to eat my greens. right?
Right.
So I think that's a word of caution worth talking about as well, is that rebelling for the sake of rebellion is one thing, but even rebelling based on your history and even rebelling based on historical data, you still have to run things through those filters because sometimes those shortcuts can get you in trouble.
Yeah, they can. But we have to wear shortcuts. We have to use shortcuts. So we're going to sit there and analyze every little thing. We have to come up with a trusted method of the division of labor. You can't do it all yourself. This isn't a DIY world as much as I love DIY shit, you know. So you have to take calculated risks with the people you can trust to bring you some information. Like this podcast, you can listen to it and you verify or not, or whatever you want to do, how much you want to trust it. But you can't do it all. So live by the principle, don't hurt other people. Okay. And then if you can get that down, like you don't even have to rebel. That in itself is rebelling against the state. That is not what they want you to do. So, and then you can get more involved from there. But just there's all kinds of ways that you can rebel safely where you're doing it for you. Encryption software on your phone and on your computer. State doesn't like that. You're protecting yourself. You're not doing anything that you're not doing right now. I'm not telling you to start doing illegal stuff after you do it. I'm saying just get it and annoy the state. It's a great way to rebel. You don't have to believe in these corporate things they're designed to make you get emotional about them. And a lot of them don't exist. It's not a problem that exists in the way that they're presenting it. They're presenting it that way so they can make money off of you. So make sure that you're rebelling for you, for a cause that you believe in, not for a cause you were told to believe in, because that cause might not even exist.
It might be an island.
Yeah, it might.
Made of trash.
The fella from Greenpeace that I was listening to, he mentioned that he had proposed that one of these windmill places make a windmill, like 1 mil off of just using renewable energy, solar and wind or whatever. And of course, nobody's ever taken him up on it. But like the idea being that he doesn't believe, and many people don't believe that it could even be done. They have to use fossil fuel energy to even get one of those built and up or whatever.
You mean to make a windmill?
Yeah.
You're saying his proposal was to create a windmill from nothing but renewable energy.
Right.
And
not
so
just
far,
wind energy, but like all renewable energy sources. Yeah.
solar seems promising.
Yeah. You got to think about getting it there, the machinery to set it up, all of that stuff. Every process, like even just like getting the raw materials to form the pieces and whatnot. I think he's right. I don't think we're there. I don't think we could do that. But he's, you know, he made a good point too. Of like, if we're really going to die in 12 years because of fossil fuels being burned, then at this point, don't you think we're beyond being worried about like nuclear waste? And it's time to start building nuclear plants.
Shouldn't we be eating a lot more cake?
Right. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. And what's the point in raising kids? Right.
Is it a narrative put out by people who want to have their kids live in a less populated world because they know that people are going to be so afraid to have children?
I don't know. I think Western society in its own kind of does that. Is as places get more technologically advanced and there's less competition for food and resources, we tend to have less children anyway, just naturally. We don't have that. I guess there's something wired in us where if we think that we're not going to be able to take care of ourselves when we're old, we want to have a bunch of kids so we're not burdening just two, you know, with taking care of us when we're old. So we have like 12 so they can split that responsibility up. So it's not so much of a burden. But as we get more advanced and we realize, oh, we can take care of ourselves up until our death day, we don't really have that desire anymore. So we have less children, and our children survive to adulthood because they're not starving and dying of COVID and all that other stuff.
Given that you could certainly survive until your death day, which is one of my favorite phrases you've ever used, do you feel compelled to have fewer children?
All right. I guess that depends on when you're talking to Vance, because Vance 6 years ago, 7 years ago, Vance 7 years ago wasn't going to have any kids at all. Like I wasn't going to have a wife or kids to my death day. Like I was going to be like my uncle, who he just has been a bachelor his whole life. You know, he likes the ladies, but he doesn't like them to live with him. You know, so I thought that's who I was. But I have two kids. But I don't have 12. If I thought that I was going to be a burden on the two, I think I probably have more. If I thought that would make their life easier later in life. But I don't think that I'm going to be a burden on the two. I don't think they're going to really have to spread out a burden. I think I might even be able to leave them with something that they're better off, you know? So,
And that's what I'm kind of getting at from an economics perspective. If you have more children,
mhm.
isn't that a higher cost of raising those children to adulthood for you, thus ensuring that you don't have the resources to last and get you through to your death day?
Yeah, I mean it does when you're talking about like an economy like we have today, but when you're talking about the economies that are less advanced, that there are things that like things like a bad crop can kill people, or things that you can't control, like if you live in a third world country where you don't have any power over the winter because you're in Cuba, but if some reason it's freakishly cold because we're in an ice age and you freeze to death, right? Or some of your kids freeze to death. Like, there's all those factors that they're dealing with that are different than the factors that we deal with, because they were never, people in that situation are never, they're not saving for a retirement. They're just getting by the next year, right? So, and then they get by again. They get through to tomorrow. It's not, they're never saving. They're just getting by. And in those kind of, the mind works when you're just getting by, like, oh, let's have more kids because they're just going to get by. And we don't want to take that much from each one of those, because there was never a thought that they're going to save to have a retirement or anything like that. But today we have a society where we do think about things like that. So we do have less kids because we do have the option of saving to where we're not a burden at all on our children. In fact, we might leave them with something. It's a whole different mindset. And we end up having less children because of it. Or no children at all.
Like, there might not even be a Cuba Gooding the third.
There could not be. But now I've had children, so I'm happy I have them. I don't want anybody to think that, like, just because I wasn't planning on having children doesn't mean that was going to be the best thing for me. So, I recommend it. But I guess if you're not the right person for children, then don't go forcing yourself to do it. But
wait a second. I see what this is. This is
Yeah.
propaganda. You can't tell me what to do. I'm going to have some kids.
It's a trap. There's no comfort fitting in a fake safety.